Good evening. Today is Friday, September the 20th, 2024. Hope everybody has been having a good day. Tonight, I want to look back upon the year 1984. It's hard to believe it's been 40 years. It was in November of 1983 that I read a very interesting book, 1984, the very interesting dystopian novel written in 1948 by George Orwell. Uh, it's been said that he wrote the book in 1948 and he just reversed the numbers, although some commentate otherwise. That's the story I'd always heard. But it's about Oceania, a society ruled by the oligarchy known as the Party, led by Big Brother. And hopefully, in the very, very near future, I will do a video about that book. Well, let's look at the year itself. During 1984, I was living in Kaufman, where I was serving as pastor of Macedonia AME Church. I was also working as a social worker at Terrell State Hospital, and my wife Deborah was a nurse at Presbyterian Hospital of Kaufman. Sunday, September, why am I saying September? It is September, okay, but it was on Sunday, February 26th. I preached in the chapel of the Federal Correctional Institute at Seagoville, Texas. After the service, Chaplain Sol Cadillo Jr. took me to visit with Ramsey Muniz, La Raza Unida Party's 1972 and 1974 nominee for governor of Texas, who was then incarcerated on drugs charges. Ramsey altogether had 3 felony drug convictions. I met him when he was running for governor in 1972, and at that visit to the president's wife, Irma. And it was in later years that Irma got in touch with me. And at her request, I wrote letters to President Barack Obama, to Pope Francis, and to a number of other people. In fact, I wrote to whoever Irma asked me to write to, seeking clemency for Ramsey because of the 3 strikes she was doing, life imprisonment without parole. On December 10th, 2018, he was released from prison on compassionate grounds, and we were for that. He lived almost 4 years after his release from prison. He died uh, in 2022, and I'm thankful that he and Irma had 4 years together after his discharge. But it was a good visit we had at the prison. I later had correspondence with him. But on Sunday, May the 20th, 1984, Family Day was celebrated at Macedonia. There were a number of visitors from the Fairfield area, including members of the Durham and Henry families to whom I'm related by marriage, and later they would be the subject of my book, The Durhams of Fairfield, an African American genealogy, that was published in 2015. On Sunday, June the 24th of 1984, our morning speaker was Joseph A. Walks Jr. of Leavenworth, Kansas. Joe was founder and longtime president of the Philaxis Society, an organization dedicated to research and writing on Prince Hall Freemasonry. Joe was the author of a number of books on Masonic history and a great friend and mentor to me. 1984, the first of my many Masonic articles was published in the Philaxis magazine. And during this year, a number of my articles were also published in the Kaufman Herald's paper pulpit, and two, one on the history of Macedonia AME Church and the other on the history of Beehive Lodge number 44, were published in volume 2 of the history of Kaufman County. Everywhere I've ever lived, I've tried to research the history of the area. On Sunday, July 28th, I preached at Lone Star Baptist Church in the Freestone County community of Butler, where my wife's sixth cousin, Archie Durham, who lived from 1906 to 2001, served as chair of the deacon board. This service was followed by the Durham family reunion at the Butler Community Center, where I challenged everyone with the following words: how do you expect to know who you are if you don't know where you came from? On Friday, let me just back up a little bit. Most of the summer of 1984 was good. These events I've described, including Joe Walks's visit to Macedonia and the preaching at Lone Star and attending the Durham reunion, these were wonderful events. And the months of June and July went very well, as did the first part of August. But beginning in mid-August and going through September, maybe a little bit into October, things got bad. It all started about the middle of August when, on the job at Terrell State Hospital, I went and made a deposit in the Terrell State Hospital Credit Union. I had been saving money in the credit union to pay Deborah's creation fee for Zakat Court number 133, the auxiliary to the ancient Egyptian Arabic Order Nobles of the Mystic Shrine. I had joined Zakat Temple number 164 in Dallas of the Shriners on November 14, 1983. I was looking forward to getting my wife into the ladies' auxiliary. And then, without any warning, the credit union raised their minimum deposit and proceeded to sabotage my financial plans. I felt betrayed. I did everything I could to appeal it, but to no avail. They were very stubborn and, in my opinion, very unreasonable. Then the next week we went to the annual conference, or I did. Deborah didn't go to this one, at Quinn Chapel AME Church in Denison, Texas. The delegate from Macedonia was I don't think I'm going to call her name, but many who knew her would remember her. She was biggest hellraiser in Kaufman, and she was fighting me. And she got up before the annual conference and talked very negatively about me. It was a very painful experience. And I had to be at that conference all week, and it was just something very hard to deal with. Well, on the final day of the conference, which was a Friday, Deborah did join me there. She and our son, Rob, who was 3 years old at the time, came to Kaufman with Brother Marvin Scott, very fine man, member of our church. Of course, my wife and son rode home with me. And when I got home, I had two pieces of mail. One that was good, one was bad. I got a tax refund from the IRS. It was about $74. Not a whole lot, but it was the first one we had in the last few years. We had having to pay up until that point. But I also got a letter from the city of Kaufman complaining about raw sewage running on the ground. And I had one run in out of it after another with my landlord, who refused to pay for plumbing bills. I went down to City Hall and complained. The repair of the sewer was my responsibility. The plumber kept dragging his feet. And finally, the city got tired and came out and cut off our water. For it seemed like 2 weeks, we didn't have water. I was going to the church and going to a local service station, filling up buckets so we'd have money to drink, to bathe, and whatever else we needed for it. It was hard. Finally, the plumber got around to doing the repairs, which I'd already paid him for, and finally the city reconnected our water. Thank God for that. And after I got back from conference, it seemed very iffy if I was going to maintain employment at Terrell State Hospital. They kept giving me the runaround. As it turned out, eventually I did. For a while, I felt like a man without a country. It was also an election year. And it was mid-September. I had been supporting he was at the time still Senator from Colorado, Gary Hart, for the Democratic presidential nomination. I'd made unsuccessful efforts to get him to come to Kaufman, where I lived. And by the time of the Democratic convention in San Francisco, it was obvious the nominee was not going to be Gary Hart, but Walter Mondale, to go against the Republican incumbent Ronald Reagan. That was a given by then. Lloyd Doggett was the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate. He ran against Republican Phil Gramm. For a while, I was enthused about the Doggett campaign. And I had counted there were 7 Sundays between the time of my phone call and the time of the general election. I called Doggett's headquarters in Austin and told his scheduler I'd like to have him come to my church one of those Sundays. And I was told he probably won't be able to do that because he's going to churches in the larger urban areas. My enthusiasm for the campaign dried up instantaneously. By the way, both Walter Mondale and Lloyd Doggett lost that year. I wasn't pleased with the victories of Reagan and Graham, but I sure wasn't shedding any tears over Lloyd Doggett. To be fair, it wasn't Lloyd who said that. It was some dumb staffer. But that demonstrated what I've observed repeatedly over the years. Small towns and rural communities are neglected by politicians, and that is terrible. Rural Americans have just as many rights and should be respected just as much as city dwellers. The credit union, the annual conference, uncertainty on the job, problem with the city over sewage, and now the Doggett campaign. 5 very painful experiences, one after another. But eventually I got through all that. On Friday, October 5th, I performed a wedding for two colleagues at Terrell State Hospital. And it had been the first wedding I'd been asked to perform in a few years, and I was really honored to be able to do that. Fast 19, the couple were still together. The wife died. The husband reached out to me and said, "Bob, you married us. Will you come do her funeral?" Again, I was honored. Two very good people. And in 2021, when I did a chaplain internship at Terrell State Hospital, this couple had twin daughters, and one of them I saw, she was working at the children's cottage at Terrell State Hospital. Her twin sister was working with her dad he had retired from the hospital, from the rehab department, and as both of them were working at the AutoZone factory warehouse. And on Saturday, October 27th, Deborah and I attended the annual Potentates Ball. It was and Commander's Ball. It was a Cot Temple in Court. And on that night, for the second time, I saw Charles DeWitt, his wife Mary was the niece of Charlie Brooks Jr., first person in history to die by lethal injection. I met him at Charlie's funeral on December 10th, 1982. And on Wednesday, November 21st, 1984, I participated in the community-wide Thanksgiving service at First United Methodist of Kaufman. And on Monday, December 24th, I attended Midnight Mass at St. Anne's Catholic Church. And the year ended at Macedonia Baptist Church. Yes, Kaufman has two Macedonia churches, where I delivered the Watch Night sermon. As I did in the first sermon of the year on Sunday, January 1st, I made reference to George Orwell's 1984, reminding the congregation they were being watched, not by Big Brother, but by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And that's my recollections of 1984. Like every year, there were some good and bad things that happened. But I thank God still being here 40 years later and to be able to tell about it. Have a good evening and a good weekend. God bless.